I am on record, I've said it before, Franklin Roosevelt is one of those people that the more I learn about him personally, the more I dislike him. But at the same time, I have to admit he is a master politician. And I think a lot of that comes out in this. One particular scene that I thought was absolutely perfect is, and I'll just set it up and you can explain it, he's going for a third term, but he doesn't want people to know he's going for a third term. He wants to look like he's not going for a third term, but the vice president comes in to talk with him. Could you talk a little bit about that, about how the third term was coming along and he tried to the last second to make it seem like he didn't want it?
Well, observers of American politics in the last 6 weeks can appreciate part of this, especially those who've been watching what's happening on the Democratic side. Because what Roosevelt was doing was sort of quietly assuring various people in the Democratic Party that he was going to give them his support. So John Nance Garner, who was his vice president, he disagreed with Roosevelt on a lot of stuff, but he bit his tongue. And he was the loyal vice president in hopes and expectation that when Roosevelt stepped aside after 2 terms, as presidents always did, going back to George Washington, then he would give his support to Garner, and Garner would be the next president of the United States. Meanwhile, Roosevelt was saying much the same thing to his postmaster general, Jim Farley, with whom he had ties that went way back even before Garner. And he declined to say that he wasn't running for a third term. He declined to give his support to either of these two until too late for them to develop any support on their own. And I say this kind of echoes, it foreshadows what happened lately, is until the very last minute, Joe Biden essentially had said, I'm going to keep doing it so that nobody could step up and mount a campaign against him. So this is the position that Farley and Garner, they had supported Roosevelt, but they became embittered by this. And so Roosevelt maneuvered his party into the position that once war broke out, then he saw this was his chance. Because Roosevelt falls into the category of when you become president, almost any next act after the presidency is really a letdown. And he had seen his cousin by birth and his uncle by marriage, Theodore Roosevelt, become utterly lost after leaving the White House. And Theodore Roosevelt went off on safari, and then he blew up the Republican Party trying to get the nomination from the guy he had essentially handpicked. And Franklin Roosevelt didn't want to do that. And he really liked being president. And so once he saw that war in Europe broke out, he basically said, this is going to be my ticket to a third term, because he'll place the position where, we need somebody who's experienced. We need somebody to have a firm hand on the tiller. And so he basically kept any Democrats from challenging him until, now we're in the middle of a war. U.S. isn't, but Europe's at war. And we got to go with Roosevelt because no one has been able to develop any momentum. I should add that aside from Farley and Garner, it really angered a lot of people in the Democratic Party who have been waiting their turn. This president gets 2 terms, then we're going to get a chance. They didn't. And then, of course, when he ran for a 4th term, this guy's going to be president for life, which, by the way, is something that Lindbergh used to criticize Roosevelt. He said Roosevelt is using this war not simply in what he says are the interests of the United States, but in the interest of Franklin Roosevelt. He wants to remain president. He wants to be president for life. And if we let him get away with it in 1940, he'll probably be president till he dies, which of course is exactly what happened.